Buenos días. Tengo el gusto de presentar hoy al ingeniero Iván Chvatík. El ingeniero Chvatík ha sido alumno, discípulo, colaborador y en especial intelectual de Jan Patočka. Es realmente el responsable de preservar su obra. Igualmente nos acompaña la doctora Věra Šiferová, a la cual ya conocen, y seguramente tendremos oportunidad de conversar con ella. Bien, ingeniero Iván nació en Olomouc, República Checa, el 15 de septiembre de 1941. Estudió física nuclear, pero pronto se comenzó a interesar en filosofía, particularmente en Husserl y después en Heidegger. Se empleó en una empresa de ingeniería que se modernizó rápidamente y por ello importó la primera computadora profesional de Suecia a Checoslovaquia. Este hecho ha sido trascendental para Iván durante los siguientes 20 años. Él se convirtió en el jefe del departamento técnico del centro de computación, ya que se suponía que se encargaría de la operación de la computadora. Al mismo tiempo, se familiarizó cada vez más con la filosofía y así el encuentro con Jan Patočka fue esencial para él. Cuando Patočka comenzó a trabajar como profesor titular en la Universidad de Carlos de Praga en otoño de 1968, Iván no dudó y se inscribió en su clase. En compañía de varios estudiantes, desarrollaron un método de notas paralelas que más tarde combinaron con un registro de grabadoras que Iván había traído de contrabando desde Suecia. Después de cada clase, afinaban su texto de manera más precisa. En 1972, Patočka se vio obligado a retirarse. Inició la era que llamamos la normalización, lo que puso fin a la era oficial de los estudios de Iván Chvatík en la Facultad de Filosofía. Sin embargo, continuó consultando a Patočka y poco a poco los mismos compañeros de clase comenzaron a acompañarlo. Así se inició la tradición de los seminarios semanales en el apartamento de Patočka. Él y Patočka leyeron la obra esencial de Heidegger, Ser y el tiempo, y estudiaron la crisis de las ciencias europeas de Husserl. Paralelamente, los ciclos de conferencias de Patočka se llevaron a cabo en apartamentos y se conservaban como transcripciones en forma de samizdat. Así aparece Platón y Europa en los años 73-74, organizado por Iván, y Ensayos heréticos 74-75. Los seminarios en la casa del maestro continuaron hasta diciembre de 1976. A principios de marzo de 1977, Jan Patočka murió repentinamente. Con un grupo de amigos, Iván logró llegar al apartamento de Patočka el mismo día de su entierro, rápidamente clasificar los documentos, especialmente los manuscritos originales, y sacarlos a lugares ocultos y seguros antes de la posible requisa por parte de la policía secreta checoslovaca. Aún así, una semana después, Iván fue arrestado e interrogado. La policía lo intimidó con prisión, le preguntaron sobre seminarios de vivienda una y otra vez, y él seguía diciendo que no sabía nada y no recordaba nada. Eventualmente lo dejaron ir, pero pronto se presentaron en su lugar de trabajo y recomendaron a los jefes que lo despidieran. Sus superiores mintieron, diciendo que Iván era insustituible debido al entrenamiento en su puesto y que sin él el sistema tecnológico de la empresa colapsaría. Entonces, a medida que la situación política en Checoslovaquia empeoraba, Iván se dedicó a cuidar el material de Patočka. Además de él, muchos otros participaron en la preparación de los textos. Además de manuscritos mismos, cuidaban de las conferencias que dictó Patočka en la Universidad y de los que dictó en los seminarios residenciales. De 1977 a 1990, reprodujeron los escritos de Patočka en todo tipo de samizdat, es decir, de manera ilegal. Hicieron un número infinito de copias. 2 veces a la semana Iván transportaba bolsas pesadas con copias de Xerox a pie o en metro para encuadernarlos. Hasta el año 89, un total de 27 volúmenes fueron publicados de esta manera, titulados retroactivamente y repartidos entre el público interesados de manera ilegal. Desde 1983, Chvatík y sus colaboradores también han preparado escritos seleccionados de Jan Patočka para el Instituto de Viena. Más tarde también se han puesto en contacto con otros centros internacionales y planificaron la edición en el exilio de los archivos recopilados. Hasta finales de 89, los paquetes de copias de Xerox de los textos de Patočka se emitían en el extranjero en varios canales conspirativos y diplomáticos emigrantes. Dr. Chvatík fue tan cuidadoso en todo esto que nunca despertó el interés de la policía secreta en serio. Después del año 77 fue interrogado durante unos 3 años, pero los interrogatorios generalmente tuvieron lugar alrededor del espionaje informático en Suecia. La policía le ofreció la posibilidad de partir, de cooperar o mejor emigrar, pero él se negó y utilizó con éxito la misma táctica de pretender ser un idiota del pueblo, palabras de él. Además de las actividades de samizdat para Iván, la década de los 80 fue un periodo de organización intensiva y visita a seminarios residenciales. Él y sus colegas se tomaron el estudio muy en serio y a fondo. Cada semana participaba en una lectura completa de Platón en original. También organizaron campamentos de estudio de fin de semana con su grupo. En algún momento en la primera mitad de la década de los 80, por invitación de uno de sus amigos, Iván comenzó a dirigir un seminario de Heidegger. Pronto notó que para los jóvenes asistentes que no habían experimentado el entrenamiento de Patočka, Heidegger era incomprensible y decidió traducir su obra, Ser y Tiempo, al checo. Para cada sesión traducía una 20 de páginas que repartía entre sus colegas. Luego, durante el encuentro, revisaban el texto, mejorándolo palabra por palabra y a la vez transcribiendo en una máquina de escribir, así que el resultado fue directamente a samizdat. En el momento de la Revolución de Terciopelo, 1989, alrededor de 3/4 partes del libro de Heidegger de 500 páginas había sido publicado en 17 volúmenes. Eran textos de trabajo, delgados, cosidos con una grapadora. Las portadas eran en su mayoría de autoproducción y con frecuencia usaban la reproducción de imágenes. En todo caso, en cada uno de ellos eligieron una frase impactante del texto en su interior como título. Iván también participó en la organización de visitas de filósofos invitados extranjeros que comenzaron a viajar a Checoslovaquia. Normalmente el visitante secreto llegaba como turista, en general un sábado. El domingo dio una conferencia secreta en su casa o en aquella de un amigo y el lunes otra antesito de regresar. El 1 de enero de 1990 se fundó el archivo Jan Patočka en el Instituto Filosófico de la Academia Checa de Ciencias. Su principal tarea desde el principio fue la preparación y publicación gradual de los escritos recopilados de Jan Patočka, cuyo concepto está parcialmente vinculado a un archivo, pero también es una edición recientemente organizada y complementada. Dr. Chvatík señala que en la década de 90, en cierto sentido, era más difícil concentrarse y terminar las cosas debido a cambios sociales y una serie de nuevas tareas públicas. Sin embargo, logró completar su traducción de Ser y Tiempo. El libro fue publicado por primera vez libremente en la República Checa en el año 1996. Iván Chvatík continúa trabajando pacientemente para organizar y publicar los archivos recopilados. Además, gestiona el patrimonio de Patočka y las traducciones de derechos de autor o licencias. Hasta ahora, los textos de Patočka han sido traducidos a más de 20 idiomas. También organiza conferencias, seminarios y otros eventos y coopera con diferentes instituciones nacionales e internacionales. Hay que añadir que expertos de todo el mundo van al archivo cuidadosamente organizado para estudiarlo. En el año 2020, es decir, el año pasado, ha recibido su distinción más reciente, el Premio Visión 97, que otorga la fundación creada por los esposos Havel. Recibió el premio por su largo y continuo trabajo dedicado a la obra de Jan Patočka. Antes de dejarlos con el doctor Chvatík, quiero recordar que somos muy orgullosos porque es la primera vez que se presenta en América Latina. Muchas gracias. Pane doktore, teď je na vás.
Well, do you hear me? Do you hear me? Do you hear me?
Sí. Ah, no.
Yeah, okay. Well, so I thank you very much for such a detailed life story of myself from Eliška Krausová. And if I understand it well, I have to start reading my lecture. Is it okay?
Okay. Yeah.
Fine. Well, so Patočka was one of the last direct pupils of Edmund Husserl, who was, as you surely know, the founder of phenomenological philosophy. Patočka met Husserl for the first time in Paris in the school year 1928-29 as a graduate student coming to Paris from Prague. He was lucky to attend Husserl's Paris lectures, better known under the title of Cartesian Meditations, at Sorbonne, and here he definitely decided to study phenomenology. Subsequently, he won a Humboldt Foundation stipend for 1932-33 and went first to Berlin. There he witnessed Hitler's coup d'etat, a shock he was later to speak of as the beginning of his political awakening. From Berlin, he went to Freiburg to visit Edmund Husserl, who was already emerited and worked at home. Husserl's then assistant, Eugen Fink, advised him to study not only Husserl, but to pay equal attention to the thinking of Martin Heidegger. Fink initiated Patočka into the deepest philosophical issues that lay hidden in the gaping abyss between Husserl's phenomenology and what Heidegger had made out of it. To delve into these obscure depths and eventually to bridge the gap, such was the task that Patočka appears to have taken up, even then, at that time, so a long time ago. In order to come closer to things themselves, as Husserl was used to say, than Husserl himself ever managed, and to let phenomena shine forth at once in their apparentness and in their historicity. Patočka consistently studied and interpreted not only the history of being, as Heidegger would put it, but to not no less an extent the history of mankind. At the time of writing the habilitation thesis, which he was to publish in 1936 on the Husserlian theme of the life world, Patočka was instrumental in organizing Husserl's visit to Prague in November 1935. During Husserl's stay in Prague, Husserl presented one of the first drafts of his posthumously published work, The Crisis of the European Sciences and Transcendental Phenomenology. Shortly thereafter, when it became clear that Husserl's manuscripts were in danger of being destroyed by Nazi authorities, Patočka endeavored to secure their transfer to Czechoslovakia. His friend Ludwig Landgrebe was thus able to prepare in Prague the first volume of the proposed collected works of Edmund Husserl under the title Erfahrung und Urteil. But when the book came off the press in March 1939, Hitler's troops were just marching into town. Nearly the whole edition was destroyed by the Nazi occupiers. During the occupation years, 1939 till 45, Patočka worked as a secondary school teacher while never ceasing to work on philosophical projects concerning both phenomenology and the philosophy of history. After World War II, he invested all his energy into his teaching at Charles University in Prague. Following February 1948, when the Prague coup d'etat ushered in a communist totalitarian regime, Patočka was sidelined into editing the work of the late Renaissance philosopher Jan Amos Comenius. In 1968, Patočka was called back to Charles University, and at the age of 61, he was finally awarded tenure as a professor there. His appointment was, however, only made official in the autumn 1968, more than 2 months after Czechoslovakia had once again been occupied, this time by the armed forces of the communist Warsaw Pact allies. After a mere 4 years of teaching, Patočka was forcibly pensioned upon reaching 65. He was left with only private engagement, so to speak, with the participants of unauthorized clandestine seminars that he held in his own apartment. In the darkest days of the 1970s normalization period in Czechoslovakia, Patočka nonetheless continued to work on his main subjects. His last and most translated major work, The Heretical Essays in the Philosophy of History, was published in an illegal samizdat edition less than 2 years before his life reached its climactic end. When he became, alongside future Czech President Václav Havel, one of the 3 initial spokespersons for the dissident civic initiative Charter 77, Patočka died after a series of exhaustive interrogations by the secret political police in March 1977. Along with Heidegger, Patočka realized already in his early days that the human mode of being, characterized mainly by freedom, is essentially different from the mode of being of things. Human freedom is transcending facticity through projecting possibilities. Yet this freedom is always anchored in a concrete situation. Distance from facticity does not mean that facticity has been done away with. Our facticity, that is our thrownness among things and situations created by the acts of those who projected their possibilities in the past, limits our freedom. Our free possibilities, which it is up to us to seize, are anchored in these limitations. The human mode of being has accordingly a historical character. Patočka feels, therefore, as a philosopher, the need to deal with history. But he is not interested in a superficial, perfunctory, or surface history, where events and their bearers are not described with a view toward grasping their meaning for life. He wants to delve into the inner or deep history. It means the historiography bent on grasping life in flux with its possibilities, which in their coming together form a simultaneous unity, form the world. This, as he says, deep universal history has two phases. The first phase is the philosophical history of the world in general, meaning the analysis and constitution of the world and time from the viewpoint of philosophical reflection. It means metaphysics and the history of understanding of being. And second, philosophy of history, in the sense of the historiography of the world proper. In other words, the reconstruction and interpretation of forces and powers active in history, which interest us inasmuch as their significance and effects persist up to the present day. The ripe fruit of Patočka's interest in philosophy of history are his above-mentioned heretical essays in the philosophy of history. In the first essay, entitled Reflections on Prehistory, Patočka explains how the matter of history is interconnected with the phenomenological philosophy and outlines his understanding of the mode of primitive life of people totally exhausted by the care for the sustenance of mere life. These people who were exhausted by the care for the sustenance, they lived in a sacred awe in front of mighty gods, carrying again and again the mythical rites from which they derived the whole meaning of their lives. As you already see from the title of this essay, Patočka understands this period as prehistorical. History proper is still waiting for its start. In the second essay, The Beginning of History, we are coming, as you know, to the main theme of my talk today, to the concept of Pólemos in Patočka's philosophy of history. He was apparently inspired by his study of the pre-Socratic philosophers. The sentences that are symbolic for his concept of the beginning of history are taken from the fragments of Heraclitus. Our task now is to grasp why. The early empires of the ancient times do not differ from the lower primitive civilizations by any new dimensions of human life not present on the preceding level. They differ only in following the same aims, it means sustenance of life, in an organized manner. But organized life generates the foundation for better people to create public space. Against the backdrop of the family, political life unfolds. This is the main new phenomenon. In the open space of polis, these better people, so to say, become free. First of all, from the labor for sustenance of mere life, but now they also have to cope with the fact that they are many. The open space of the public sphere is only possible when based on the mutual recognition of free and equal individuals. However, this recognition must be continuously acted out in tough competition by the manifestation of individual excellence. In the public sphere, free individuals soon understand that here they no longer live in the mode of acceptance as they did in myth. They no longer accept all meaning and possibilities from mythical powers, from gods. They are now, for the first time, opening their possibilities on their own. They live in the mode of initiative. They must seek opportunities for action all the time. It is a life in active tension, a life of extreme risk, where unceasing upswing is necessary, because every pause is a weakness for which the initiative of others lies in wait. It is no more the life of natural cyclicity as it was in the primitive mythical societies. This unsheltered life is a completely new life, the life of upswing par excellence. This very novelty that happened in ancient Greece is for Patočka the beginning of history. But this is not all that belongs to the change. In Patočka's view, history was an immense shock. The so-called prehistorical period saw the gradual collapse of the closedness of the old world in myth, where a person lives in the safety of a pre-given meaning, that is in a meaning granted and modest but reliable, accepted without question. Such a world, Patočka writes, is meaningful, that is intelligible, because there are powers that stand over humans, ruling over them and deciding their destiny. Although there is much of great mystery in it, there is no room to question. For questions assume a possible distance from what we are and from the situation in which we find ourselves. This kind of distance is established where liberation takes place, where the competing free individuals in the public sphere find out that they do not understand their newly acquired freedom and start to explicitly pose questions which were unnecessary in myth. To these questions, new and never posed before, there are, however, no ready answers. The problematic character not of merely this or that, but of the whole of world and life as such emerges. The discovery of this new all-inclusive problematicity, this is the shock of the beginning of history, which gives birth to philosophy. In this way, the beginnings of philosophy are tightly interconnected with the beginning of political life. Only these two new events together make up the beginning of history. The world had changed together with man himself. This shock, which opens up the new world, is nicely symbolized by the lightning mentioned by Heraclitus in fragment B64. Tady panta o jakizei keravnos. All that is governs the lightning. As if the dark landscape of the life were illuminated for a moment, but then again humans stand in the darkness alone with no support, while still being curious about what all that could mean. Here, curiosity is the beginning of wisdom, as both Plato and Aristotle declare. A similar situation concerns the political life. The participators in the new situation are many. Their demands are various, and so are their attempts to solve the political problem in a given situation. In a given situation, we are always with others, who along with us share and create that situation. The different views at how to solve the given situation led frequently to conflicts and wars, be it between neighbors, be it between political parties. But amid these internal and external struggles, the Hellenic polis was born. Out of these struggles was born the Western spirit, as Patočka says, the spirit of free meaning bestowal, the shaking of life as simply accepted, shaking of all its certainties. It is Patočka's main thesis that it is only in this milieu of problematicity where something new and stable can come into being, the milieu of problematicity where different views of different people are competing quite seriously, so that they are even risking their lives. Here I shall read about 2 pages from the second essay, from the second radical essay. The spirit of the polis is a spirit of unity in conflict, in battle. One cannot be a citizen, polites, except in a community of some against others, and the conflict itself gives rise to the tension, the tenor of the life of the polis, the shape of the space of freedom that citizens both offer and deny each other, offering themselves in seeking support and overcoming resistance. Action itself, however, is in turn basically nothing but struggle, defense against others, and attack wherever an opportunity arises. In such continual conflict and struggle, there arises in the polis a power that stands above the opposed parties and on which the meaning and glory of the polis depends. The lasting fame among mortals, kleos aenount neton. Heraclitus speaks of that which is common to all, which nourishes all human law, that is, the polis in the general functioning and particular decisions. What though is the divine law? We need to know that polemos is what is common, and that conflict is the right. Dike equals eris, and that everything takes place through eris and its impetus. Polemos is what is common. Polemos binds together the contending parties, not only because it stands over them, but because in it they are at one. In it there arises the one unitary power and will, from which alone all laws and constitutions derive, however different they may be. Yet the power generated by strife is no blind force. The power that arises from strife is a power that knows and sees. Only in this invigorating strife is there life that truly sees into the nature of things, to phronein. Thus, phronesis, understanding, by the very name of by the very nature of things, cannot but be at once common and conflicted. To see the world and life as a whole means to see polemos, eris, as that which is common. Xenon esti not past. Xenon esti pasi to phronei. Insight is common to all. To speak, to lend words to the insight into the common origin means to speak with understanding, syno. That though means to accompany things with such words as will divide each according to the way it is, and to tell how it is with them. To delimit a thing according to its being, however, means to see in it terms of the way it enters into openness, means into the realm of the individuated cosmos. By emerging out of darkness, it means to see the lightning of being over all that is, the open night of what is. That, though, is the work of the one who is wise, the work of the philosopher. In the philosopher, all arete, all excellence, the mark of free life characteristic of the polites, is gathered. Sophronein is the greatest arete, and wisdom is to say what is uncovered. The aletheia. Here in the printing text there is a small error. The aletheia. Well, and the sophronein is the greatest arete, and wisdom is to say what is uncovered, and to do what is thus understood in its fundamental nature. Polemos, the flash of being out of the night of the world, lets everything particular be and manifest itself as what it is. Thus, the greatest contradiction cleaves together in a unity which is above all, which manifests itself in all and governs all. Humans, however, encounter this one and become wise only when they themselves act, accomplishing their deeds in the atmosphere of freedom, ensured by the law of the polis, which in turn nurtures itself on the one law of the divine, whose name is Polemos. Thus, Polemos is at the same time that which constitutes the polis and the primordial insight that makes philosophy possible. Polemos is not the destructive passion of a wild brigand, but is rather the creator of unity. The unity it founds is more profound than any ephemeral sympathy or coalition of interests. Adversaries meet in the shaking of a given meaning and so create a new way of being human, perhaps the only mode that offers hope amid the storm of the world, the unity of the shaken but undaunted. Thus Heraclitus sees the unity and the common origin of philosophy and the polis. Therewith, the question of the origins of history seems decided. History arises and can arise only insofar as there is arete, the excellence of humans who no longer simply live to live, but who make room for their justification by looking into the nature of things and acting in harmony with what they see, by building a polis on the basis of the law of the world, which is Pólemos, by speaking that which they see as revealing itself to a free, exposed, yet undaunting human philosophy. Well, that they see and revealing itself to a free, exposed, yet undaunting human, and that is philosophy. Thus, the history of the West and history of such have a truly dignified beginning, one which shows not only where the great rupture between prehistorical life and history is situated, but also on what level historical life must sustain itself if it is not to succumb to external and internal threats. This beginning then reaches out to future historical outreach, especially by teaching what humankind does not wish to comprehend, in spite of all the immense hardness of history, does not want to understand, something that perhaps only later days will learn after reaching the nadir of destruction and devastation, that life need be understood not from the viewpoint of the day, of life merely accepted, but also from the view of strife, of the night, of Pólemos. The point of history is not what can be uprooted or shaken, but rather the openness to the shaking. So it was Patočka himself. You see, to read this text is not quite simple, and it is really necessary to read it many times again and again before one is able to grasp what he wanted to say. Okay, so now how is this connected with the dark view of the 20th century understood as one immense global war? I shall try to outline the main points of Patočka's sixth heretical essay entitled Wars of the 20th Century and the 20th Century as War. The first main idea of Patočka concerning the First World War is that all philosophies of history wanted to explain this war, but nobody noticed that the war may be itself something that can explain, that has itself the power of bestowing meaning. But what was the meaning the First World War explained to us? What was the content of that deep addiction to war? And Patočka answers, this war, similar to the previous wars, was an ideological war, but it is difficult to determine its idea. Patočka determines it as like this. The shared idea in the background of the First War was the slowly germinating conviction that there is nothing such as a factual objective meaning of the world and of the things, and that it is up to strength and power to create such meaning within the realm accessible to humans. It is in fact what Nietzsche calls nihilism. There is no absolute meaning, Hence, it is necessary to realize a relative meaning, and the only possibility to do it is to use power. And what was the relative meaning to be achieved in the given situation? It was the desire to let manifest what has been in preparation for already around 300 years. It means the conception of being that was born in the 16th century with the rise of the mechanical natural science. Man as a lord and owner of nature. The First War represented a definitive breakthrough of this idea. And the party which was leader of this revolutionary idea of the new techno-scientific age was Germany. The revolution taking place here had its deep driving force in the conspicuous scientification as the chief trait of Germany's life, a scientification which understood science as technology. Therefore, Germany fought against the status quo of Europe and wanted to be the leading power of the world. The war swept aside all the conventions that inhibited the release of accumulated energy and transvaluation of all values under the sign of power. Therefore, the First War is the decisive event in the history of the 20th century. It determined its entire character. The second main idea of Patočka is that war is terribly ambiguous. On the one hand, it is something extremely absurd, so that people would like to bring it to an end as soon as possible. On the other hand, this feeling of absurdity of the war was the force which sent millions of people to hellfire of the front line with the one and only wish to restore peace, to restore a normal, calm, and pleasant day, a sunny day of normal life. Hence Patočka says, it was the forces of the day which sent people to the night of the trenches and front lines. The forces of the day, life and peace, govern by means of death, by threatening life. From the perspective of the day, life is everything, the highest value. It means that people are afraid that if they would not fight, they would be killed. So they go on fighting. The third main idea. Now Patočka recollects the experience of Teilhard de Chardin described in his Écrit du temps de la guerre, 1965. The experience of being at the front line and being ready to sacrifice one's own life is an absolute shock. All the ideas, plans, and values of the day are shaken, turned upside down, turned futile, and so on. It is the experience of an absolute freedom from all interests of day. There is here the understanding that something has already been achieved that is not a means to anything else, but rather something above and beyond everything else, an absolute peak. And Patočka identifies this extreme experience with the experience which Heidegger describes in his lecture, Was is Metaphysique? The experience of the absolute nothing, a paradoxical experience with a being with a capital B. This experience completely transforms the meaning of life and meaning of everything in the world. Through this experience, man escapes the rule of the day. Only the readiness to sacrifice one's own life has the power to defeat the forces of the day, to escape from the vicious infinity of their meaningless, decadent planning. And in this experience, the enemy, the adversary, is understood, as Patočka says, as a fellow participants in the same situation, fellow discovered of absolute freedom, with whom agreement is possible in difference, a fellow participant in the upheaval of the day, of peace, and of life lacking all peaks. This is the source of Patočka's idea of the sacrifice and of the solidarity of the shaken. We see that even here, in the absurdity of the front line, Patočka wants to see the same structure as he saw at the beginning of the history in ancient Greece. The war, which had to be a means for establishing a new rule of the pale infinity of mere sustenance of life, to be an opportunity for an upswing and for discovering of completely new possibilities for life, for establishing a completely new world order. With not much exaggeration, we can say that the idea of the European Union is in fact such a fruit of the wars of the 20th century and also the fall of the communist dictatorship in Europe. Nevertheless, these historically new phenomena are permanently endangered by the possibility of losing that which has been achieved, the possibility of falling to the decadence of mere sustenance and the annoying slavery of the forces of the day. The result of Patočka's thinking about the philosophy of history is, therefore, that if Europe should still exist as Europe, it is necessary to understand that Pólemos, in the sense of an upswing over the level of mere sustenance, is the source of freedom, of justice, of a good life, and, last but not least, of modern democracy. Only this life in upswing is that which Patočka is willing to call history. The conflict of mere life, chained by fear, with life at the peak, with life in upswing. Thank you for your attention.
Eduardo.
Thank you. Thank you, Danke. Dziękuję, Professor Chvatík. Before my brief intervention, I want to say some words in English. I want to say that I had the privilege of doing a research stay at the Patočka archives in Prague in 2006, where I met the engineer Ivan Chvatík, who received me very kindly and guided me to consult the material available at that time. It was very intense and important experience that made me continue studying and in my possibilities spreading Patočka thought in Latin America, with the great limitation of not being fluent in Czech. Although I have tried to get into certain rudiments of that beautiful language in order to have at least familiarity with it. The most important terms and categories. Thanks to Ivan Chvatík for his precious presence here. Although in a virtual space, it is a Latin American space, in fact, and it is for him, as Eliska told us, the first time in our field, in our ambit. Thanks to Germán, of course, for the effort to achieve the presence of Ivan Chvatík among us. And of course, thanks to Eliska Krausova for her always invaluable help and disposition. And thanks to Byron for all the logistical and technical work without which the activity itself would be impossible. And it's for me also a pleasure to finally for me meet Vera Shiferova, who will be at this seminar next time. Thanks. I want to read my intervention, that is brief. Voy a leer mi intervención, que es breve. Voy a hablar en español, ahora sí. Y voy a hacer una pequeña correlatoría en una modalidad de modesta réplica a la magnífica conferencia que nos presentó Iván Chvatík sobre el concepto de Pólemos en la filosofía de la historia de Jan Patočka. Bueno, con gran lucidez, claridad y una gran capacidad de síntesis, el profesor Iván Chvatík da cuenta de un concepto central que permea el texto que nos ha ocupado en estos últimos meses, es decir, los ensayos heréticos sobre la filosofía de la historia. Se trata nada menos que del concepto de Pólemos, cuya presencia en esta obra patočkiana es develada con gran cuidado por parte de Chvatík. Después de realizar un igualmente sintético excursus, me parece que siempre es iluminador estar recordándolo, ¿no? Recordar el itinerario biográfico, el itinerario filosófico de Patočka, el autor entra de lleno en recordarnos cuál es la posición central que tiene la filosofía de la historia en el pensamiento de Jan Patočka, porque la historia como fenómeno humano se instaura a partir de la libertad, sí, limitada por nuestra facticidad, pero reforzada por la conciencia de tal facticidad como generadora del rasgo distintivo humano de la proyección de posibilidades, es decir, la dimensión expresiva de la creatividad humana, de la creación también. Destaca que la noción de historia que se desprende de la filosofía de Patočka es esencialmente la de una historiografía, digamos, sui generis. Él insiste mucho en decir que no es una historia en la superficialidad, en la superficie, ¿no? Sino de la profundidad. Entonces, digamos, una historiografía de la vida o una historiografía del mundo propiamente dicho, que es fuente constante para la instauración del sentido. Esta cuestión de la instauración del sentido, que es la gran preocupación de Patočka, se muestra como para la fenomenología, la historia constituye un ejemplo de tránsito entre el mundo natural y el ámbito del problema que la propia fenomenología, desde Husserl, aborda a través de la noción de epogé, de la reducción. Chvatík despliega el gran conocimiento que tiene de los ensayos heréticos para regalarnos su reconstrucción del significado y el papel del concepto de Pólemos en la filosofía de la historia del gran pensador checo. Y enfatiza cómo dicho concepto, de clarísimo origen heraclitiano, surge a partir del segundo ensayo titulado justamente El comienzo de la historia. Pero la tarea que asume va más allá, me parece, de la constatación histórico-crítica y será justamente la de tratar de comprender las razones de ello, las razones de lo anterior, del surgimiento justamente de este concepto y su significado. Significado profundo, importante, digamos, para los alcances que se propone el propio Patočka. Toda esta cuestión es, a su vez, coincidente con la noción de vida política, o si se quiere, de espacio público, que al menos en un primer momento pueden considerarse como sinónimos. El desplegarse de la vida colectiva consciente, así la llamaría yo, es precisamente lo que da contenido al término griego de polis, y constituye una novedad en el horizonte civilizatorio, no solo en relación con el momento prehistórico, sino incluso desde dentro de la propia historia, una vez que hemos logrado incursionar, que hemos incursionado en el segundo movimiento de la existencia humana. Vemos aquí como la remisión al triple movimiento de la existencia humana en Patočka es inevitable siempre, ¿no? Hay una actividad libre y consciente, y ello significa que también hay consecuencias y responsabilidades. Ya no está el ser humano instaurado en el mero movimiento de aceptación, abiertamente pasivo, sino en un movimiento que tiende a la actividad. Justamente, una vida política es una vita activa, para recordar a Hannah Arendt, filósofa que, por otra parte, Patočka mismo reconoce haber ejercido una fuerte influencia en él. como lo atestigua este pasaje del texto de Chvatík de fuertes ecos arendtianos. Lo cito, en su conferencia nos dijo él: el espacio abierto de la esfera pública solo es posible cuando se basa en el reconocimiento mutuo de individuos libres e iguales. Y subrayó en itálicas justamente el reconocimiento mutuo de individuos libres e iguales. Se trata de una liberación de las cadenas que constreñían a los seres humanos a la pura pasividad para abrirse a la posibilidad del cuestionamiento. Constituye un auténtico alzamiento respecto de la vida anterior, que es expresiva del primer movimiento existencial. Y dicho alzarse permite abandonar entonces la esfera de la aceptación, de la pura aceptación, para incursionar hacia la esfera de la acción. Por ende, la esfera del abrirse al sentido, cuya expresión más antigua para Patočka la encontramos precisamente en la polis de la antigua Grecia, que sería prácticamente lo que constituiría el desprenderse también del segundo movimiento de la existencia humana. Ahora bien, una vez supuesta esta dimensión del alzarse, podemos ver la otra dimensión que la acompaña, a saber, la dimensión del conmoverse, ¿no? Ambas categorías que, como sabemos, dan el nombre principal al título de este seminario que Germán mismo ha armado con esa intención. El comienzo de la historia generó, en efecto, una profunda conmoción, o como prefiero yo decir, un hondo sacudimiento, un sacudirse de las seguridades aparentes del mito, un estremecerse, ¿no?, para abrirse hacia el riesgo de la libertad, misma que ya no es objeto de una asunción irracional y acrítica, sino que es planteada como pregunta constante y explícita, es decir, como oportunidad de posibilidades, como se decía al inicio. Cuando Iván Chvatík escribe, cito, el descubrimiento de esta nueva posibilidad omniabarcante, esta es la conmoción del conocimiento de la historia que da nacimiento a la filosofía. Bueno, cuando escribe esto, nos está diciendo, en otros términos, cómo para Patočka el taumas en griego, el asombrarse, ¿no?, el asombro griego, es la otra manera, diríamos, la manera originaria de la conmoción, del decir conmoverse. Chvatík se detiene para transcribir lo que será un objeto de profunda meditación para él y que nos conduce al final de su recorrido. Un largo pasaje del segundo ensayo, se leyó todo, justo el pasaje donde Patočka despliega su interpretación del concepto de Pólemos. A mí me parece que todo el pasaje evoca, entre otras muchas cosas, inevitablemente, el Evangelio de San Mateo, en el capítulo 10, versículos 34 en adelante, cuando Cristo dice, no he venido a traer la paz, sino la espada, que en algunas traducciones aparece como, no he venido a traer la paz, sino la guerra. Patočka confirma, sobre todo a través de este segundo ensayo, en particular el pasaje mostrado, que él puede ser interpretado, como yo lo he hecho por otra parte, como un philosophus in tempore belli, es decir, un filósofo en tiempos de guerra, un filósofo de la guerra en ese sentido que Chvatík acaba de mostrar con claridad meridiana. Y aquí nuestro querido invitado sintetiza en tres ideas principales, que ya le hemos escuchado, su lectura del importante sexto ensayo y que yo me limitaré a glosar de la siguiente manera. La primera idea, lo acaba de señalar, nos habla de la importancia que tiene como paradigma del fenómeno bélico la Primera Guerra Mundial, la Gran Guerra, ¿no? Mucho más trágica y más dura en alcance que la Segunda incluso, sobre todo respecto de lo que Patočka nos quiere mostrar, ¿no? Normalmente, paréntesis rápido, normalmente se toma como paradigma del conflicto bélico más terrible a la Segunda Guerra Mundial, lo fue, lo sabemos, los epígonos que tiene y demás, pero como experiencia en sí, digamos, de la tragedia, ¿no?, del fenómeno bélico, está la Primera Guerra Mundial. Aquí lo que Chvatík resalta es la aguda constatación de Patočka sobre el hecho de que la guerra puede entenderse como un fenómeno que per se es capaz de otorgar sentido. Una frase que podría escandalizar y sin embargo es igual de escandalosa que la frase que Cristo proclama en el Evangelio de Mateo. En este caso, se trata del despertar a la importancia del sentido precisamente porque la guerra evidencia su ausencia, evidencia justamente la ausencia del sentido. La segunda idea resalta el carácter de ambigüedad de la guerra como rasgo distintivo principal. Se trata de una ambigüedad que genera la distinción entre la dimensión diurna y la dimensión nocturna que Patočka concibe en sus ensayos. Es decir, se muestra la paradoja trágica de que lo diurno, el día, ¿no?, pacificado, afirmador de la vida, es posible a través de la muerte y la constante amenaza a lo vital. Y de alguna manera es expresivo también, recordando que Patočka es un gran conocedor y amante de la filosofía griega, como sabemos, en cierta manera me recuerda a mí mucho la noción de hibris, ¿no? Finalmente, en la tercera idea, Chvatík resalta la dimensión profundamente existencial que Patočka imprime a su propia interpretación de la Gran Guerra, con la trinchera como gran protagonista. Claro, evoca ahí a Teilhard de Chardin. Nosotros podemos recordar la presencia de muchos filósofos, más que en otros momentos, muchos filósofos en esta primera guerra. Carl Jung, ¿no? El propio Teilhard de Chardin, Rosenzweig, en fin. Con la trinchera, decía, como gran protagonista, interpretación que genera precisamente las dos grandes categorías patočkianas sobre las que todavía hoy en día debemos continuar reflexionando. Por un lado, la solidaridad de los conmovidos, y por otro, la idea de sacrificio. Categorías que surgen de la experiencia absolutamente concreta del ser humano, y que además se relacionan entre sí estrechamente, que ve frente a sí al enemigo que comparte con él la misma experiencia. O sea, no solamente al compañero de trinchera que es, digamos, de su propio país, o su amigo, no, también al enemigo que ve frente a frente, que ve vis a vis, ahí radica la tragedia, que comparte con él la misma experiencia, una experiencia común caracterizada por una situación de sinsentido y de absurdo, pero que no deja a estos últimos con la última palabra, sino que nos abre a la dimensión, por otra parte, dimensión de claro origen religioso, del sacrificio. Lo absurdo, lo absurdo de la experiencia del frente para Patočka, nos recuerda a Chvatík, puede llegar a ser generadora de sentido y apoya su afirmación en la tesis por la cual, según él, la propia Unión Europea ancla su identidad justamente en las guerras del siglo XX. Lo que de paso nos hace ver desde otro ángulo la importancia que reviste precisamente esta idea que se maneja en muchísimos ámbitos de preservar, recuperar y preservar la memoria histórica. La idea del alzamiento, enraizada en el Pólemos, lucha en contra del sentido dado sin problema y posibilita, por tanto, nuevamente, el reino de la libertad. Bueno, hasta ahí mi breve intervención. Agradezco mucho la escucha. Gracias.
Já vím, že jsme vás na nic nepřipravili, ale chtěli bychom se zeptat, mě říká Germán Vargas, který to řídí, jestli byste chtěla něco taky vy doplnit. V jakékoliv řeči uvidíme, co s tím uděláme. Nevím. Pane Ivane, není vám...
Eduardo.
Špatně slyším dneska. Quería hablar en la semana que viene, quería hablar sobre la filosofía de la historia en la obra de Patočka, de la parte un poco otra, de la parte de la filosofía de la educación y también de la parte de los estudios de Patočka sobre Platón y sobre Comenio. Y creo que estos problemas tienen una forma otra, una forma de las preguntas sobre la alma abierta y la alma cerrada. Creo que Iván habló sobre el comienzo de la Europa, sobre el comienzo de la historia. Y yo quiero hablar sobre esos problemas como sobre el comienzo de la alma abierta. Alma es en Patočka, para Patočka, la alma abierta es místo.
Lugar.
Lugar donde los seres humanos encuentran con el todo, con el mundo todo. Y la alma cerrada es la alma que se identifica con las parcialidades, con las fuerzas, con la carrera, con la alma cerrada, počítá, cuenta y quería decir, este problema se puede explicar también de esta parte, de otra parte, como el tema de la alma abierta y de la alma cerrada, pero no quería hoy hablar más porque hay que tener los textos en las manos.
Listo. Sí, no, to je perfektní, chtěli zeptat. Pane Ivane, teď přijdou teda na řadu otázky. Ještě jsem chtěla říct jenom mezi námi česky, že vás poslouchá přes 50 lidí, což je víc než těch našich studentů, takže říkám to, abyste se usmíval a byl spokojený. A pak to bude natočený a bude to teda ve vesmíru, takže pak to vidí ještě víc lidí, ale ne, to je takový vtip můj. Řeknu tomu Brianovi nebo Germánovi, aby organizovali ty otázky. Germán, entonces, ¿quién va a organizar las preguntas? Brian o tú, ¿cómo vamos a proceder?
En concreto, yo voy a hacer una pregunta en el acto y ya vamos a ir pasando en la pantalla las preguntas que lleguen de la audiencia para comunicárselas también a Dr. Chvatík. Dr. Chvatík, the topic of Pólemos is so relevant for some historical societies and processes such as that of Latin America, especially for Colombia. Our students have found in Patočka's work a serious reason for reflection in to think about our historical condition from the point of view of philosophy. Pólemos, this is my question, Pólemos has been translated as war. It is a male voice. In Greek, Warp is father of everything, is the canonical translation in Spanish. La guerra es padre de todo. Patočka sees war as an expression of the metaphysics of force. On the other hand, Pólemos is a possibility of human experience, of the deep movement of human experience. How is Pólemos different from war, according Patočka? How is Pólemos different from war, according Patočka? This is my question. Thank you very much.
Well, it's not so difficult to answer. It is perhaps not quite correct to translate Pólemos only by the word as war, because it is better to say something like struggle in English, yeah, because Pólemos has many different forms, and it is present nearly in everyday situations. You have to solve very simple problems when you are going to buy something and you are refused by a rude man in the store. So you have to struggle with him and get your goods, or you are struggling with your boss somewhere in the factory who is rude and doesn't want to be just to you, or you are struggling as a politician with some other politicians in the parliament who do not want to understand your idea, and you think your idea is better than his idea. So the struggle, this polemos is really in every aspect of the life. So we, in a way, have to agree with Heraclitus' saying that Polemos is the ruler and the core of everything in human life. And on the other hand, war is something else. War is an organized activity where many people are ordered by the rulers to fight against each other. It's something different. But of course, also war belongs under this concept of polemos.
Thank you very much. Eliska, other questions?
Byron.
Okay, thank you. I have a question. Is the next question. I think that Pólemos is a concept very important in Patočka, but I would like to ask you for peace and what is the relation between conflict and peace? Is peace an opposition, or rather is peace that harmony, disharmony, like a tension expressed in the political community? In freedom, I mean, if war or polemos is a conflict that produces breakdown, crisis, and even destruction, what happens when a certain liberation, creation, opportunity is caused? Is this positive, meaning that allows harmonious coexistence in the political community, a peace product more than conflict? It's like thus the peace is more important than conflict. Thank you.
Well, I am afraid I don't understand exactly what is the question. So there is a concept of conflict on one hand, and what was the other concept you are speaking about? Or perhaps you have to explain me what are you asking for?
For peace, paz.
Yeah, but I couldn't understand the meaning of the question.
Maybe what is the relation between peace and polemos?
Yes. Well, peace is a concept which is on the same level as the concept of war. but even in peace, there are all the time conflicts between people, and these conflicts can be solved either in a peaceful way, to use the word, or of course it can be solved by force. You can kill the other who is not willing to understand you. But this is the extreme position. In normal peaceful society, these conflicts are being solved in a much more milder way. You can either stop visiting the people who is not wanting to agree with you, or you can accept his views as something which has also a sort of meaning, but you are not agreeing with that. So you can respect the meaning of another one. So there are a lot of ways how to solve the conflicts in the peaceful situation.
Okay, thank you very much.
¿Tú me escribiste es para que yo lo pregunte?
Sí, por favor. Sí, están acá en el chat.
Kristian Díaz. Tak já se budu, tady je otázka a budu se snažit to přeložit, což samozřejmě není snadný. Je to Kristian Camilo Díaz a ten říká: dobrý den, děkuji za konferenci a za její organizaci. Má otázka je, jaká relace, jaký vztah je, nám můžete říct, mezi Pólemos od Heraklita a obětování Krista, když o tom mluvíme ve 20. století. Nevím, proč říká 20., když jsme v 21., ale takhle to napsal. Jaký je mezi tím rozdíl? To je asi to, co chce říct. Ale buďte tak hodný a buď to řekněte anglicky, nebo to řekněte tak, abych já...
Tak já to teraz zkusím anglicky. Well, I don't see, in fact, I don't see the connection between the concept of Pólemos and the deeds of Christ. He's not so much polemical in his life. Well, perhaps he swept out some people from the church, but otherwise he's not making any struggle against somebody else. So when we want to speak about Christ in the milieu of Patočka's thinking, we can only remember Patočka's comments to the last words of Christ on the cross, where Christ asks God, why have you what is the word? Where have you left me? There is a better word in English for that. But you know what is the last about 5 words of Christ on the cross. And Patočka says, it is necessary to understand these words not as a question, as a rhetorical question, which turned out to be not necessary after 3 days, because after 3 days Christ is recovered from the death, and God shows that he doesn't abandon Christ. But Patočka says it is necessary to understand these words as the formulation of the situation in which the humankind is nowadays. It is a situation when God has abandoned us, and now when we are abandoned by God, we have to try to bestow meaning to our lives and to our world. And it means that Patočka would interpret this problem of Christ and God in a similar way as he interpreted the creation of the mythical world and the mythical man before the beginning of the history. So there is a very special relation of Patočka and Christianity. He was in the beginning of his life, and a long time then, he was a believing Christian. But when he started to analyze the problems of the philosophy of history, he, in a way, was asking for a sort of, as he says, to think the Christianity through to its end, and this thinking through is what I already mentioned. To understand that we cannot hope that the meaning will be granted to us from God. We have to do ourselves something for looking and finding meaning of our world and life.
Tady mám další otázku od jedné známé filozofky, která se jmenuje Graciela Ralón, ale neumím to dobře přeložit. To jsou ty dvě slova, které používá Patočka. Jeden je vzmach a ten druhý je, jak paní Věra mě pomůže, konmoción je jako šok. Jak to používá on česky? Teď si nemůžu vzpomenout. Otřes. Děkuju, otřes. Tak, to se tady překládá jako, to je velice těžko překladatelný a pořád nejsme všichni zajedno. Ale já udělám tu otázku tak, jak ona ji udělala. Jsem zajedno, že oběť, nebo slovo jako oběť, je to nejlepší výsledek Pólemos, nebo nejlepší vysvětlení pro Pólemos. Ale ptá se, mohl byste vysvětlit význam vzmach, význam slova vzmach, protože vzmach má jako výsledek otřes. A přesto myslím, že nejsou na stejné úrovni. Čem jako se liší, myslím, že...
Well, I wouldn't say that the result of upswing is this being shaken. The upswing, I have tried to explain it. It is the movement in one's life, which is rising above the mere level of just eating and sleeping and looking for the means for being able to eat and so on. It is a movement which shows or which it is a movement in which man discovers that there is something more in life and world than the only care for sustenance, for, as I said, for eating and having shelter and sleeping. So only when man understands this higher level of the life, then the meaning in life can be found, can be bestowed, because when you just when you are just moving in eating and sleeping and sustaining the life, you can perhaps say that it has no meaning because you die anyway. So why to care for life when you die? It has no meaning. So the problem of meaning appears only in the situation of upswing, something like that. Well, yes, and the question was containing the other situation, the situation of embarrassment when man is confronted with this problem of meaning. Yes, but perhaps in the question there was a third concept. It was the concept of sacrifice, if I am right. So this concept of sacrifice, it is something which comes, which is important in a sort of extreme situations. For example, let's imagine the interrogation by the secret police, and the situation when they are forcing you so much that you are near a sort of collapse. So there it is the situation when you can either collapse and tell them everything they wanted to know, or you can refuse and risk your life because they are going to kill you. Of course, in reality, it is not so simple because the methods of such secret policemen are being refined and refined, and they, as we know, are able to destroy your ability of what is it called? Your free will, so that you then are perhaps speaking without being able to oppose them and so on, as we saw in some monster processes both in Czechoslovakia and much more in Russia and so on. So it is not so simple, but the meaning of the concept of sacrifice is, as I said, you can decide that you are not willing to leave your position and you prefer to die instead of leaving your position. So this is the sacrifice.
Další? Můžu? Dobře, tak jedna otázka od jedné dámy, která se jmenuje Elsa Sue. Ella se ptá, když každá společná existence v Pólemos znamená oběť, co se stane, když se ta oběť nerealizuje? To je ta otázka.
Well, but I don't think that every situation of Pólemos means sacrifice. That is not so. You can be in the situation of Pólemos and conflict, and it is not necessary that you sacrifice your life. You are just risking your life. It would be necessary to discuss it in detail. Well, concerning this, the concept of sacrifice, I realized that we have a very nice example from the today or yesterday's news. Perhaps you heard about Mr. Navalny in Moscow, where he was condemned to 3.5 years in prison, and he knew that if he goes back to Russia from West Germany, that he would be imprisoned, and he went there and accepted this danger. So it was a sort of sacrifice from him. And he perhaps knows that if he wants to be successful in the struggle with Putin, he has to risk. He has to risk his life.
Bien, no, me hablaban de otra pregunta, pero no llegó. Entonces, Germán.
Hola, Elish, que probablemente es la mía, no sé. ¿Byron?
Sí, sigue, está bien.
Okay. Okay, I'll try to make my question in English, although I apologize for my raw English. So at the beginning of the pandemic, it might be something not focused on your presentation,
Nevertheless, I would like to explore this subject. At the beginning of the pandemic, Agamben has published, from the beginning up to today, Giorgio Agamben has published a number of interviews or essays and blogs or whatever, talking about the implication of the epidemic in public life. In one of the publications, in an interview he was giving to a blog, he precisely entitled the interview Pólemos Epidemios, and he said the following. I will try to quote it in a raw translation into English. I read it in Spanish. He says, epidemic as the etymology of the Greek term demos, which designates the people as a political body, shows as a primarily political concept. Pólemos epidemics is in Homer, the Civil War. What we see clearly, says Agamben, today is that the epidemic is becoming the new terrain of politics, the battlefield of global civil war, because it is clear that civil war is a war against an internal enemy who sinks within us. He says that. Now, inspired in that text I just read, I would like to ask you, how do you see the current idea of politics in the context of biosecurity that leads to a kind of bio-war at the cost of political war? I mean, political life, saying in other words, it seems like the biosecurity, which implies a kind of bio-war, is led, demining our political life, our public space. How do you see this relationship between those concepts? Thank you very much.
Well, I don't understand your word. Did you mean bio like bios? Bios? Bio? Because I was not sure what you are saying. So, well, but perhaps you have to explain the question again. What are you exactly asking about?
Yes, exactly. I mean, bios. It's a war. It's a healthy war. Let's say. I don't know how to explain myself in English. I apologize for that. But what I mean is that this whole concept of biosecurity, that we have to be very clean, and we have to be separate from each other. We have to avoid public space, be confined. I don't know, to stay at home all the time. It seems to imply that it's also a bio war.
Yes.
I don't know if I'm making this more clear.
Well, yeah. Now I understand better what you are speaking about. I was not sure about this word bio.
All right. Thank you.
So first of all, I would say that this problem of epidemic is not a war. It is a wrong understanding of the situation. It's not a war. War is between people, between nations, between states. But here we are having trouble with something invisible, with a virus. Nobody sees it, and so on. You cannot be sure if you met it or not. So it is not a war. It's a quite different situation. Perhaps it would be better to say that here in this epidemic situation, we can see that the idea which I mentioned in my paper of the maître possesseur de la nature, is quite funny, because we are not able to be real rulers over viruses and so on. It's a big effort to develop the vaccine, but perhaps you already know that this new modus of the virus perhaps will be stronger than the vaccinas. So the problem is very, very, very big, but it is not a war. It's some politicians call it war, but I think it's wrong. So perhaps now you can again ask your question, because I don't know if it was an answer what I said.
Well, it was. I mean, it's yeah. Some politicians, some philosophical, political philosophers, such as Agamben, for instance, they do believe this is yes, a kind of war. Actually, it is not him. He's kind of criticizing the fact that politicians are trying to make this into a war, and they say that the enemy is among us, no? And for that, and because of that, we have to be apart from the public sphere, which demands, ¿cómo se dice? Which undermines our political life. And this is a little bit what I was thinking about.
Yeah.
But you already answered it. But thank you very much.
Well, but it is true that it undermines our political life, because the governments and the parliaments and people in power, in a way, they do not exactly know what to do. And they are improvising from minute to minute, from day to day. And on one hand, it is quite clear that it's very difficult to decide what to do. But on the other hand, it is also clear that it's very easy to misuse this situation. And that's why some people are manifesting and demonstrating against the steps of the governments. But on the other hand, it is difficult for the government what to do and how to formulate the rules for millions of people when it is quite clear that every single man is in another situation, and every single shop is in another situation. And when you have to say just one sentence as a law for these millions, it is not so easy to formulate the rules so that everybody is happy with that. It's a very terrible situation, of course. But
bueno,
it is not
yo creo que hemos abusado mucho de su tiempo. Vamos a despedirnos de nuestros importantes visitantes. Recordemos que estamos concluyendo nuestro seminario del año pasado con esta magnífica conferencia, y dentro de 8 días con otra que nos va a ofrecer gentilmente y generosamente la doktora Věra. Já myslím, že my vám poděkujeme, už jsme toho hlavně panu doktorovi, už jsme ho využili až do nekonečna, nepočítali jsme s tím, že bude tolik otázek, některé dokonce zůstaly, ale Germán, který nemá dobrou konekci, mě požádal, abych vám řekla, že jsme vám velice vděční. My takhle končíme ten náš seminář o Patočkovi, který trval celý minulý semestr, jenomže až příští týden vlastně skončí. Dnes jste byl vy, příště to bude paní doktorka Věra. A máme pocit, že jsme tak udělali takový zlatý hřeb, hlavně proto, že to pro všechny, kteří chodili na ten seminář, je to velice zajímavý a jak jsem říkala, připojilo se daleko víc profesorů z Jižní Ameriky, který samozřejmě nejsou naši studenti, ale měli velký zájem o vás. Takže my vám opravdu znova moc děkujeme a doufáme, že zase brzy se dáme do contacto. Solamente le traduje al doctor Chvatík y a la doctora Viera, que les agradecemos. Recordé que estamos terminando el seminario, recordé que tuvimos ese honor de ser la primera vez escucharlo aquí en América Latina. Expliqué que la semana próxima concluiremos con la conferencia de la doctora Viera. Eso fue lo que más o menos dije. Veo que Germán pudo contactarse, no sé si quiere decir algo más.
Well, I also
thank you very much for this time.
Well, I also thank you very much for the invitation, and I must apologize myself for my not quite understandable answers and so on. But on the other hand, I am used to keep the philosophical discussion over the whole night, so for me it's no problem to make it, yeah.
Bueno, muchas gracias. Eduardo, ¿quería también decir algo?
Muchísimas gracias. Thank you very much. Dziękuję mnohokrát. Rád te vidím, profesor Chvatík. Muchas gracias, ¿no? Muchas gracias por su generosidad. Thank you for all, and to see you. Muchas gracias a todos y gracias a ustedes. Gracias, Germán.
Já na závěr můžu říct, že jsem hrozně spokojená, protože všichni vyslovují správně vaše. Na začátku s tím byl opravdu chaos a říkali, protože ve španělštině je č, takže to říkali jakýmkoliv způsobem. Ale vidím, že je Eduardo, který je z Mexika. A pro něj to bylo ještě těžší než pro nás Kolumbijce. Tak to říká krásně, říká Chvatík. Le felicito, Eduardo, como aprendió el checo. Todos ustedes han pronunciado perfectamente los nombres, eso es lo que estaba diciendo. Y eso es un éxito ya. I Patočka taky řeknou všichni velice krásně. To taky není snadný ve španělštině, Patočka.
Gracias.
No tak dobře. Takže nashledanou.